I counted exactly 21 times they interrupted me during my presentation. Not once, not twice, 21 times. The strange part? The colleagues below me were allowed to speak freely. But every time I opened my mouth, someone cut me off, corrected me, or explained my own work back to the room. So the next week, when our $420 million investor joined the call, I recorded everything. After the third interruption, he raised his hand and said, "I'm noticing a pattern." And that was the moment my boss stopped smiling. Let me tell you the whole story. I counted exactly 21 interruptions during my presentation. Not because I was petty, not because I was looking for reasons to be offended, because by the 8th interruption, I realized something important. No one else in that room was being interrupted. The junior analyst spoke freely. The 2 project managers below me talked for 5 minutes at a time without anyone cutting in. Even Brandon, who had joined the company 6 months earlier and still confused client revenue with projected revenue, was allowed to finish his thought. But every time I opened my mouth, someone stepped in. Just to clarify, let me jump in there. What Amelia is trying to say is, actually the broader point is, by the time I reached slide 12, I had stopped trying to hide the tally mark I was making in the corner of my notebook. 1 line, then another, then another. 21. My name is Amelia Grant, and at the time, I was Senior Director of Strategic Growth at Veyron Systems, a software company that had spent 8 years trying to look bigger than it was. We weren't small. We had government contracts, enterprise clients, and a glossy headquarters with glass walls that made everyone feel more transparent than they actually were. But we were not stable. Behind the polished lobby, we were burning cash faster than our sales team could explain. Our biggest product launch was delayed. Our European expansion had missed projections twice, and the board was quietly panicking. That was why the presentation mattered. We were preparing for Meridian Capital. Meridian wasn't just another investor. They were the investor. A $420 million growth funding opportunity. If they came in, Veyron could expand, hire, recover, and survive the next 18 months without layoffs. If they walked away, the company would have to restructure. Everyone knew what that meant. People with offices kept their jobs. People with badges did not. For 6 weeks, I had built the investor strategy deck. Not assisted with it, built it. I cleaned the numbers, rebuilt the market analysis, identified the client expansion path, found the weakness in our retention narrative and fixed it with evidence. I stayed until midnight so many nights that the cleaning staff started leaving my office light on because they assumed I was still inside. Then, 3 days before the internal rehearsal, my boss, Daniel Cross, told me he wanted a few voices in the room. That was his phrase, a few voices. He invited Brandon from Sales Ops. He invited Tyler from Product Strategy. He invited Melissa from Communications. All 3 reported into departments that depended on my work, not the other way around. Still, I didn't object. I had learned early in my career that objecting too soon gave people permission to call you defensive. So I said, "Of course. The more aligned we are, the better." Daniel smiled like I had passed a test. "Exactly," he said. "Collaborative energy." The rehearsal was scheduled for Thursday at 10. I arrived at 9:30 with printed copies, updated appendices, and a backup version saved to 2 separate drives. I had slept 4 hours, but looked calm enough that no one could tell. The boardroom filled slowly. Daniel came in last, carrying coffee he had not made himself and confidence he had not earned. He sat at the head of the table and said, "Let's make this sharp. Meridian does not need a lecture. They need a story." That annoyed me more than it should have, because the deck already had a story. A clear one. Problem, proof, growth path, capital use, investor return. But I nodded. Then I began. Meridian's core concern will be whether Veyron's growth is repeatable without overextending delivery capacity. So the structure of this presentation is designed to answer that directly. Let me jump in, Daniel said. First interruption. He leaned forward and looked around the table. What Amelia means is, we want to show discipline, not just ambition. I looked at him. That was exactly what I had just said, but less precise. Right, I said. Discipline is the central theme. Slide 2 shows. Before slide 2, Tyler said, raising one finger, I think we need to define the product story more emotionally. Second interruption. Melissa nodded. Yes, investors respond to emotional clarity. Third. Brandon added, and revenue. Fourth. I waited. No one seemed to notice. When the room settled, I continued. Slide 2 shows our historical customer acquisition efficiency. The important point is that although total spend increased, the cost per qualified enterprise lead dropped by, can we not get too technical? Daniel said. Fifth. This is Meridian Capital, I replied evenly. Their diligence team will absolutely review the technical assumptions. Of course, he said, smiling. But let's not bury the headline. The headline was on the slide, in 48-point font. I moved on. By slide 5, I had been interrupted 9 times. By slide 8, 13. At one point, Brandon explained my own client segmentation model back to me incorrectly, and Daniel praised him for simplifying it. I corrected the error, gently. Daniel interrupted before I finished. Let's not get into the weeds. 14th. That was when I drew the first visible tally mark. Not angrily, quietly. A vertical line in the top corner of my notebook. Then another. Then another. At the end of the rehearsal, Daniel clapped his hands once. Good energy, he said. A lot to tighten, but good start. Good start. The deck had taken 6 weeks. He turned to Brandon. I like your point on revenue confidence. Maybe you should own that section with Amelia. Brandon tried to look humble. Tyler was assigned the product vision section. Melissa was assigned the opening narrative. I was left with the financial assumptions, risk mitigation, and appendix. In other words, the parts that required accountability. Daniel looked at me. You're okay with that? There are moments in life when people ask whether you are okay with something they have already done to you. They are not asking for your opinion. They are asking for your compliance. I closed my notebook. Of course, I said. Daniel smiled again. Great. Team player. That afternoon, I went back to my office and stared at the 21 tally marks. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt something colder. Recognition. This was not the first time it had happened. It was simply the first time I had counted. For 2 years, I had watched the pattern repeat itself. I would identify a problem. Someone louder would restate it later and receive credit. I would raise a risk. Daniel would call it premature concern. 3 weeks later, when the risk became visible, he would call a meeting to discuss what we're now seeing. I would prepare the client strategy. A man from another department would present it because he had better room energy. The strange thing about being underestimated is that people think it makes you invisible. It doesn't. It makes them careless. That evening, I stayed late again, but not to fix the deck. The deck was already strong. I stayed to fix the room. First, I opened the transcript tool in our video conferencing software. Company policy allowed meeting recordings when external investors joined, as long as the participants were notified. Meridian required recordings for compliance review anyway. Second, I created a clean version of the deck with presenter notes embedded. Every assumption, every source, every revenue bridge had my initials in the version history. Third, I exported the document activity log. It showed who created what, when edits were made, and which slides had been copied from my strategy document into the final investor deck. Fourth, I made a private copy of my notes from the rehearsal. 21 interruptions. I didn't add commentary. I didn't write emotional labels. No disrespect. No bias. No toxic workplace. Just names, timestamps, and what happened. 10:04. Daniel interrupted during opening structure. 10:07. Tyler interrupted market definition. 10:09. Melissa interrupted positioning. 10:11. Brandon interrupted revenue model. And so on. Facts are heavier when you don't decorate them. On Friday, Daniel sent the revised presentation assignments. Melissa would open, Tyler would explain the product roadmap, Brandon would cover revenue expansion, Daniel would close. I would support live Q&A. That meant I would sit there while other people presented my work, then appear useful only if someone asked a difficult question. I replied with 2 words. Looks good. Then I called my friend Priya. Priya had worked in corporate governance before leaving to become a consultant, who made more money helping companies avoid scandals than most executives made creating them. She listened quietly while I explained. At the end, she asked, "Are you trying to prove they're rude? Or are you trying to protect yourself?" Protect myself. Good, she said. Rude is subjective. Pattern is not. That sentence stayed with me. Pattern is not. She told me not to accuse anyone, not before the investor call. Let the room behave naturally, she said. People like that reveal themselves best when they think nothing has changed. So I changed nothing. On Monday, Daniel held a final prep meeting. It was shorter this time because most of my speaking sections had been removed. Melissa practiced the opening. It was polished but empty. At Veyron, we believe the next generation of enterprise intelligence depends on trust, scale, and human-centered transformation. No one knew what that meant, but everyone nodded. Tyler spoke confidently about the product roadmap and skipped the part where 2 features were still in testing. Brandon described revenue expansion using a chart I had built, then misread the conversion rate. I corrected him. Daniel exhaled. Amelia, maybe save detailed corrections for after. Meridian will ask about that number, I said. Then we'll handle it. I nodded. Another tally mark. By Wednesday morning, the day of the investor call, the office had that strange corporate electricity that happens when everyone is pretending not to be afraid. People wore better clothes. Conference rooms were cleaned. The CEO, Richard Vale, walked the hall twice with no destination, which was how we knew he was nervous. At 1:45, we entered the large boardroom. The screen at the front showed the Meridian call waiting to connect. Daniel sat closest to the camera. Melissa sat beside him. Tyler and Brandon took the center seats. I sat near the end of the table, with my laptop open and my notebook beside it. Daniel glanced at me. Amelia, you're good to jump in only if needed? Yes, I said. He seemed satisfied. At 2 o'clock exactly, Meridian joined. There were 4 people on the call. 2 associates, 1 operating partner, and 1 man everyone recognized. Elliot Marin. He was not the loud kind of powerful. He had gray hair, a plain navy suit, and the stillness of someone who had watched too many executives talk themselves into failure. He controlled Meridian's growth fund. The $420 million decision would not happen without him. Daniel began with warmth. Elliot, great to see you. We're excited to walk you through the opportunity. Elliot nodded.
Likewise. We've reviewed the materials. Please proceed.
The recording notification appeared at the top of the screen. Everyone saw it. No one cared. Because they believed recordings were for investors, not for truth. Melissa opened. She delivered her paragraph about trust, scale, and transformation. Elliot listened. His face did not move. Then Daniel transitioned to Tyler. Tyler spoke for 6 minutes about product vision. He sounded excellent if you didn't know which parts were real. Then came Brandon. He smiled too much. Our revenue expansion model is built around 3 levers, he said. Upsell, vertical penetration, and international acceleration. He clicked to my chart. The chart I had rebuilt 4 times. Our projected expansion revenue is conservative, Brandon continued, because we're only assuming a 28% conversion of qualified enterprise leads into signed expansion accounts. My hand paused over my pen. That was wrong. Not a small wrong, a dangerous wrong. The 28% figure was not lead to account conversion. It was pilot to expansion conversion after procurement approval. If Meridian thought we were claiming 28% lead conversion, they would either think we were lying or incompetent. Probably both. I waited half a second to see if Daniel would correct it. He didn't. So I spoke. Just to clarify, the 28% is pilot to expansion after procurement qualification, not lead to account conversion. The lead conversion is lower and shown in the appendix. Brandon's smile tightened. Daniel turned slightly toward me.
Right, but the broader takeaway is still revenue confidence.
First interruption. I wrote it down. Elliot's eyes moved from Daniel to me. Not dramatically, just enough. Brandon continued. 2 minutes later, he described the European expansion numbers and blended Germany with the Netherlands. Again, wrong. Again, material. I spoke. The Germany numbers should be separated from Benelux. They have different sales cycles and compliance costs. Tyler jumped in.
What Amelia means is there are regional nuances, but strategically, Europe is one motion.
Second interruption. I wrote it down. Elliot looked down at something on his desk. Maybe notes, maybe the deck, maybe nothing. Then Tyler moved into product expansion. He claimed the compliance automation feature was fully deployable. It was not. It was in controlled release with 3 clients and 2 unresolved integration issues. This time I did not wait. That feature is not fully deployable yet, I said. It is in controlled release. We can describe the timeline accurately without weakening the strategy. Daniel laughed softly. Not a real laugh. A smoothing laugh.
Amelia is our detail hawk, he said. Very valuable. But yes, for today's purposes, we're focused on strategic readiness.
Third interruption. Before I could write it down, Elliot Marin lifted his hand. Not high, just enough to stop the room.
I'm noticing a pattern, he said.
Silence. Daniel smiled carefully.
A pattern?
Elliot leaned back in his chair.
Yes.
No one moved. Elliot looked directly into the camera.
Each time Ms. Grant provides a correction, someone reframes it before she finishes.
The boardroom changed temperature. Daniel's smile weakened.
I don't think that's the intention. I didn't comment on intention, Elliot said. I commented on pattern.
There it was. The exact word Priya had used. Pattern. I kept my face still, but inside, something locked into place. Elliot continued.
And to be clear, the corrections she has made so far are not minor. They relate to revenue quality, regional cost structure, and product readiness.
Brandon looked down. Tyler shifted in his chair. Melissa stopped pretending to take notes.
Daniel said, "Absolutely. Amelia has been deeply involved in the preparation."
Deeply involved. 6 weeks of work had become deeply involved. Elliot did not blink.
Who built the expansion model?
No one answered quickly enough. Daniel turned toward Brandon. Brandon turned toward me. I said, "I did." Elliot nodded once.
Who separated the European market assumptions?
I did.
Who prepared the product readiness risk language?
I did.
And who decided Ms. Grant would not present those sections today?
Daniel's face changed. It was subtle, but I saw it. For the first time since I had known him, he looked surprised by a question.
We wanted a cross-functional presentation, he said. Cross-functional is useful, Elliot replied. But expertise is usually more useful when discussing a $420 million investment.
No one spoke. Then Elliot said the sentence that broke the room.
This is exactly why we're reconsidering the structure of our involvement.
Richard Vale, our CEO, who had been silent until then, leaned forward.
Elliot, could you clarify that?
I can, Elliot said.
We are evaluating whether Veyron has the operational maturity required for growth capital at this scale. Today's presentation was meant to increase confidence. So far, it has raised questions.
Daniel's voice lowered.
Questions about the business? Questions about leadership judgment.
That landed harder. Because business problems can be solved with money. Leadership problems make money run away. Elliot turned a page in front of him.
We received a deck with strong underlying analysis. Now, in discussion, the person who appears to understand that analysis is sitting at the edge of the table being interrupted by people presenting her work less accurately.
No one looked at me. That was how I knew everyone was thinking about me. Elliot continued, calm as stone.
So before we proceed, I'd like Ms. Grant to walk us through the model directly.
Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Richard looked at me.
Amelia?
It was the first time in months that my name sounded like authority in that room. I moved my laptop closer. Of course, I said. My voice did not shake. I started at the revenue bridge. I explained the difference between new enterprise acquisition and expansion revenue. I walked through conversion stages, procurement timing, and churn risk. I identified which assumptions were conservative and which depended on capital deployment. No one interrupted, not once. I moved to Europe. I explained why Germany required longer compliance onboarding, why Benelux had faster pilot adoption, and why France should not be included in first-phase projections, despite strong inbound interest. Elliot asked 2 questions. Both were sharp. Both were fair. I answered them directly. Then I moved to product readiness. I did not exaggerate. I said the compliance automation feature had strong demand, but was not fully deployable. I explained the integration issues, the timeline, the technical staffing gap, and exactly how Meridian's capital would close it. One of Meridian's associates asked, "Why not present this as fully ready and handle integration post-funding?" I said, "Because if you fund a story that isn't operationally true, the first 12 months become reputation management instead of growth." Elliot smiled for the first time. Not broadly, but enough.
Good answer.
Daniel stared at the table. The rest of the call lasted 40 minutes. I led most of it. By the end, Meridian had not committed, but they also had not walked away. Elliot closed by saying,
"We need to revisit some governance questions before moving forward. But the underlying business case is stronger than the presentation initially suggested."
That was not praise. It was a warning wrapped around an opportunity. When the call ended, no one moved. The screen went dark. The boardroom remained silent. Then Richard turned to Daniel.
What the hell was that? Daniel's face reddened. I think Elliot misunderstood the dynamic. Richard looked at me. Did he?
The room waited. This was the moment people imagine as dramatic. The moment where you slam the notebook down, expose everyone, deliver the speech you practiced in the shower, and walk out while the villain collapses behind you. But real power rarely requires theater. I opened my notebook. No, I said. He didn't misunderstand. Daniel looked at me sharply. I turned the notebook so Richard could see. Last Thursday, during the internal rehearsal, I was interrupted 21 times. Today, I was interrupted 3 times in the first 15 minutes. Each time involved a material correction. Richard stared at the page. Daniel said, "You were counting?" Yes. The word was small. It still changed the room. I opened the file on my laptop. I also documented the deck version history, source models, and presenter assignment changes. Not because I wanted conflict, because I was concerned that the accuracy of the investor presentation was being compromised. Daniel pushed back from the table. That is a very serious accusation. It is a very serious situation, I replied. Richard held out his hand. Send me everything. Daniel said, Richard, I don't think we should overreact based on... Richard cut him off. Stop talking. It was the first interruption all day that I appreciated. I sent the files. Then I stood. If there are no further questions, I'll go back to my office. Richard nodded. Daniel did not look at me. By 5 o'clock, calendar invitations started disappearing. The follow-up prep session Daniel had scheduled was canceled. The executive leadership sync was moved to private. At 6:30, Richard came to my office. He did not sit. That told me the conversation would be formal. I reviewed your documentation, he said. I waited. It's thorough. Yes. He exhaled. Why didn't you bring this to me earlier? It was a reasonable question from someone pretending not to know the answer. Because when the pattern benefits leadership, reporting the pattern to leadership usually becomes the problem. He looked away. That one reached him. After a moment, he said, Meridian wants another call Friday. They requested that you lead it. I said nothing. They also requested governance changes as a condition of moving forward. I knew what that meant. Not fully, but enough. What kind of changes? Clear ownership of investor materials, direct reporting line for strategic growth, board visibility on capital deployment assumptions. He paused. And Daniel is being removed from the Meridian process. I should have felt satisfaction. I didn't. I felt tired. Justice often arrives late enough that it feels more like exhaustion than victory. Richard continued. I want you to lead Friday's call. With what authority? He frowned slightly. What do you need? That was the first intelligent question he had asked me in 2 years. I need formal control of the investor deck. I need Brandon, Tyler, and Melissa to provide input in writing, not live edits. I need direct access to Meridian's diligence questions. And I need my title adjusted if I'm representing the company's growth strategy. Richard studied me. You're asking for a promotion. No, I said. I'm asking for the authority that already matches the responsibility. There was a difference. He knew it. The next morning, an announcement went out. Effective immediately, I was appointed Vice President of Strategic Growth and Investor Operations. Daniel Cross would be transitioning to an advisory role on internal alignment. Corporate language is fascinating. It can make a collapse sound like furniture being rearranged. Brandon sent me a message first. Congrats! Excited to support, however useful. Useful. Not helpful. Not accountable.
Useful. I replied, "Please send your revised revenue notes by 3 p.m. with source references." He sent a thumbs up emoji. Tyler came by my office around noon. He hovered in the doorway. "I hope you know I never meant to undermine you." I looked up. "Meaning to is not the only way to do it." He swallowed. "Right. Send product readiness updates by 4. He nodded and left. Melissa sent clean positioning language with no drama. Of the 3, she adapted fastest. I respected that. Daniel did not contact me, but at 4:12, I received an email from him. Subject: moving forward. Amelia, I recognize yesterday became more tense than expected. I hope we can continue to collaborate constructively and not allow one meeting dynamic to define years of working together. Best, Daniel. I read it twice, then I archived it. Some emails are not worth answering because they are not written to communicate. They are written to create evidence. So I created better evidence by doing the work. Friday's call was different from the first second. I sat at the center of the boardroom. Richard sat to my left. No Daniel. No performance. No one tried to make the business sound cleaner than it was.
I opened with the truth. After our last conversation, we restructured today's discussion around operational evidence rather than presentation roles. I'll walk you through the growth case, the risks, and the capital controls we recommend. Elliot nodded. Proceed. So I did. For 90 minutes, we discussed the company as it actually existed. Not the fantasy version, not the polished version, the real one. The one with strong client demand and weak internal discipline. The one with a valuable product and a dangerous habit of overpromising. The one with growth potential if adults were willing to tell the truth before the market forced them to. At the end, Elliot said, "This is the first conversation that has made me more confident rather than less." Richard looked relieved enough to age backward. Elliot continued, "We're not ready to finalize today, but Meridian is prepared to continue diligence under the revised structure, with Ms. Grant as the primary operating contact." Primary operating contact. I wrote it down, not as a tally, as proof. 3 weeks later, Meridian committed. Not the full $420 million at once. They were too smart for that. The deal was structured in tranches, tied to operational milestones, governance reporting, and product deployment targets. But the headline was still enormous. Veyron secured the capital it needed. The company celebrated publicly. There was a press release, there were photos. Richard called it a milestone built on teamwork, discipline, and trust. That made me laugh privately. Teamwork had almost ruined it. Discipline saved it. Trust had to be forced into the room by documentation. Daniel left the company 6 weeks later. The announcement said he was pursuing new strategic opportunities. I never asked where. Brandon became much quieter in meetings. Tyler learned to say, "Amelia, can you confirm?" before explaining anything he did not own. Melissa became one of my strongest collaborators because she understood something the others resisted. Authority had changed hands. Not because I shouted, because I stopped allowing confusion to protect people who benefited from it. Months later, someone asked me if counting the interruptions had been worth it. I thought about that. 21 interruptions in one rehearsal. 3 interruptions in front of Meridian. 24 moments where someone assumed my patience was permission. The mistake they made was thinking silence meant I had nothing to say. But silence can be storage. It can hold dates, times, names, patterns. And when the right person finally notices, silence can become the loudest thing in the room. So yes, it was worth it. Not because Daniel was removed. Not because I was promoted. Not even because Meridian stayed. It was worth it because the next time I walked into that boardroom and began a presentation, something remarkable happened.
I finished my first sentence, then my second, then my third. No one jumped in. No one clarified. No one translated me into a weaker version of myself. They listened. And for the first time in a long time, I did not have to count. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is not weak. They are simply collecting proof. And when the truth finally speaks, it does not need to shout.
Select now another video in our series of family and company dramas. They are all powerful stories of people coming back stronger after they have been humiliated or hurt by family members or their management. Always make sure you stay strong. Let nobody ever tell you what you are worth. You know the best. Of course.